Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, folks, today's a follow-on. Last episode, which many of you tuned in, and I'm really grateful, thank you all so much for tuning in, was a podcast about communication. What I think is one, if not the, most critical leadership core competency. I raised several points, I gave a few axioms, I used famous quotes to make the points. Again, listening to the entire episode, I think, is really the best. But here it is in cameo. 1, be mindful, not only about what you say, but how you say it. Another of the axioms I used was you never have a second chance to make a first impression. And then I went on with quotes from famous people about communication, how to improve it. We talked about verbal and non-verbal communication, research that's done, that oftentimes the non-verbal communication of a leader can be more or greater than that which is in their spoken word. I made the point that context certainly plays a role there. Words are important. Making sense and making meaning of what people say with their words, hugely important. But we need to also keep in mind that in not saying something, of not telling the story, by not communicating, that too is communication. And therein sort of lies the problem of where we are today to talk about the President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, who in these last several days has gotten us into a war. Not just an idea or euphemism, they've actually used the word war. And we're going to talk about the practical application of this hugely important leadership core competency, communication. How it has occurred, how it has not occurred, and I'm going to give you some of my insights about it. Okay. I'll quote from a couple of political pieces. The Political Playbook is this specific source. It's sort of an amalgamation of news that comes out each day. I think it's pretty good because it gives quotes from many and varied people. I'll just touch on a few of these pieces to make the points. So what we're going to do is try to begin with where this all began, all right? A contextual framework. Let's talk about the beginning, all right? So here we go. About the focus from the playbook, and I'm quoting. 2 months into 2026, and Trump has held 4, quote, affordability rallies. He's made a handful of policy announcements on the cost of living. He's launched a stunning military operation in Venezuela, a hyper-aggressive immigration drive in Minnesota that left 2 American citizens dead, caused a major diplomatic incident over Greenland, seen his DOJ, that's the Department of Justice, forced to release millions of documents from the Epstein files, and attempt to prosecute the chair of the Federal Reserve, and the government itself has partially shut down the Department of Homeland Security. And I'm saying that again. This follows an earlier government shutdown under Trump. But now, from a communication point of view, folks, here comes the big one. Because now there's this. Embarking on a major war in the Middle East with little effort to prepare the U.S. public, well, that would be pretty far from anyone's ideal election year strategy, let alone for an operation that literally he campaigned on ending foreign wars. So, primary elections in the United States for the midterms began yesterday. But Trump doesn't seem to care. Polls at the outset showed historically low levels of public support, and since then, this is Politico's Maya Ward, give full attribution there, and her colleagues noted that GOP leaders have struggled to offer a consistent case as to why the president had to act. Okay, so from the last episode to now, from theory to practice, if you will, let's talk about that. His own party, the Republican Party, the GOP, has struggled to offer a consistent case as to why the president had to act. Folks, here's an axiom for you. Take this away. For leadership to be effective, it must be consistent. Try that again. For leadership to be effective, it must be consistent. Okay. Well, what have we seen so far? Nothing but inconsistency. Did we communicate with our friends, our allies, our partners, with NATO? No. Did we communicate with the American people? No. And yet, from a golf club in Florida, he begins a war. Oh my God. Of all the places, what would be the most inappropriate way to communicate that we're starting a war with Iran, but from a country club in Florida? Holy cow. Hugely, hugely not the way to communicate. Okay. Well, the Republicans need to show fealty to their leader, to their king. And if you don't, you will pay a heavy consequence. So, most Hill Republicans remain supportive in public. And the Republican leadership expects to win the war powers vote in the Senate literally this afternoon. But privately, we're hearing a very different story. Quote, most Republicans want clear objectives, clearer than they are now. This is what one House Republican told Meredith Lee Hill of Politico. Folks, communication about war is at that top of the list, right? It goes without saying. You're not going to go to war without communicating why you're doing it, what the mission is, what the expectations are, what are the goals, what's a timeline, what are the resources. You need to think this through not only from step one, but several steps ahead. Because we need to literally, in strategy, and military tactics, think about what next? If this happens, then what do we do? If this does not happen, what can we do? And on and on and on. It really is a 3 or 4 level chess match to fully understand before even beginning to engage in a war. Well, initially, there was a thought that this was effectively a ticking clock. Quote, it was stated, it needs to get over quick. Otherwise, this expletive, I won't read the word, nightmare. It's already a nightmare because you've got the MAGA coalition tearing at the seams. Anything in a game of subtraction right now is, again, an expletive disaster. Anything we do that hurts our own base is catastrophic. They need to explain to the American people, and they need, frankly, to do it quickly. And they really need to do it to the Republican base. Folks, if you don't communicate with those on your side, and you don't make a compelling case for those that might question you, you have no basis to begin. And yet, Trump did. Well, what's happened so far? After the hue and cry goes out after we've started a war, lawmakers, they were given classified briefings last night, expect Trump to ask Congress for emergency cash to finance the war. This is on top of the nearly $1 trillion, that's right, with a T, $1 trillion, Congress has already given the military this past year. So, politicos, again, Jennifer Schultes and Catherine Tulloch McManus have written about this. And in the Gulf, crude oil supplies from Iraq and Kuwait could start shutting down within days if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Today, folks, the straits remain closed. Well, this makes it pretty easy for the Democrats. Quote, at the end of the day, no one has convinced me that the midterms will not be won or lost on questions of the economy and affordability. Folks, this is what people care about. This is how they live. They're not in the Middle East. They're sitting at a kitchen table in their home, in their town, in their community, and they're trying to make sense of how it's all going to work. Taking care of their home, feeding their family, educating their children, getting them health care, a myriad of right-in-your-face things that they as a family need to understand and communicate with one another about. So now the Dems are going to get to add Iran, the war, to a list of what they will paint as Trump's broken campaign promises. Remember the election? He said he's going to lower prices. He's going to deport the, quote, worst of the worst immigrants. He's going to release the Epstein files and now end, quoting here, folks, end forever wars. So, it ends up being another easy to understand data point, Politico says, to the typical voter who already feels this is not what I was promised. So, for a leader, we've talked about this. I highlighted it in the last episode as well. Trust, right? Trust in your leader, critical, particularly if you're going to war. How do you do that? Well, trust is based upon trustworthy behavior. So if you don't know what you're doing, how you're doing it, how long you're going to go there. You're not going to communicate with others. You're not going to build the alliances, except with Israel, who may have talked you into it. We're unsure about that. That story seems to wander as well. Well, we've got some problems regarding communication. So, in the meantime, that family all across America is trying to sort things out in their life. And those that voted for Trump are saying, this is not what I was promised. This is not what I was promised. Okay, so it's not a good scenario. Where are we? Let's talk about the state of play now. We're, say, roughly half a week into the U.S.-Israel war with Iran. The conflict across the Middle East shows few signs of contracting. Instead, we're pushing into new terrain, from Turkey to Sri Lanka. And we're starting already to give longer-term horizons. So even as some Hill Republicans frame the fighting as a limited operation, not really a war, and certainly not a forever war, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, left the time frame open-ended and expansive, so said Politico's Paul McCleary. Quote, you can say 4 weeks, but it could be 6, it could be 8, it could be 3, he told reporters at a presser this morning. More military planes are arriving to dominate Iran's airspace today, Hegseth said, and the attacks on Iran will escalate with, quote, death and destruction all day long, end quote. He trumpeted the killings of an unnamed Iranian who'd allegedly led a Trump assassination scheme. This person, according to Hegseth, is one of the latest casualties. No name, no circumstance, no timeline, no nothing, no facts other than an outcome that he's really proud that he's killed someone. Folks, in terms of communication, this is what we call folly. It is an abject failure. It is a case study on how not to communicate, particularly at this most critical time, at a time of declaring war. But he's done this without Congress doing that, which constitutionally is a requirement, not to so much to Trump. He doesn't feel a need to communicate with them except after the fact, and then and only then with an ever-changing story. Remember that axiom? For leadership to be effective, it must be consistent. Well, this folly, going to war with Iran, has been anything but consistent. It's an ever-changing story with ever-changing facts, which aren't facts at all, folks. They're hearsays. They're spin to get us to be on board with something that there's absolutely no basis to be on board with. This imminent threat doesn't exist. The capacity for ballistic missiles to reach the United States does not exist. The fact that within 1 week, this is a quote, within 1 week, Iran would have had a nuclear bomb is factually incorrect. In fact, to show that inconsistency, it was Trump himself that said in the previous foray into Iran that the Iran nuclear sites had been obliterated. A quote, obliterated. So these stories bounce around, jump around, not supported in any way with facts. Folks, to communicate about going to war, you have to be factual. You have to be absolutely truthful because you need to win the trust of our friends, our partners, our allies, and most importantly, the American people. Okay, trumps folly. Following on from the episode on leadership, I think this is a huge living example of how not to communicate. Okay, everyone, take care. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.